Prison escapes with bulldozers, riots, and ghostly entities. These are creepy things caught on camera inside prisons. Back in 2017, there was a riot at Stiuso Baranowski Correctional Center, one of Massachusetts' highest security prisons. It started when two inmates got into a fight. Officers came in to break it up, but things got out of hand. Instead of going back to their cells, dozens of inmates just didn't. It took over the whole housing unit. The inmates started tearing the place apart. Chairs were broken, furniture was ripped to pieces, and anything that could be used as a weapon was picked up and used as one. That unit held 88 inmates total. 46 of them joined in, so you've got a small number of correctional officers, nearly half the unit, coming at them. And apparently it was pretty normal for just two officers to be watching around 90 inmates at a time here. Staff eventually had to pull out and let it run its course. The footage showed busted security doors, smashed furniture, trash everywhere. It went on for hours. The thing is, a lot of these inmates were already in for life, so I mean, what were they gonna get? More charges? Didn't really scare anyone. In fact, as Public Safety Secretary Daniel Bennett later said, another court date just meant a day out of the prison. This is also absolutely nuts. Like the kind of thing you only see in a John Woo action movie. Kinda nuts. So back in 1995, a group of prisoners in Copenhagen came up with a pretty blunt escape plan. Most prison breaks involve tunnels, months of careful planning, disguises. These guys skipped all of that and they just had somebody show up with a bulldozer. Hey, that works. Footage from outside the prison shows the machine driving straight into the prison wall and tearing a huge hole through it. Within seconds, inmates start pouring through the opening and making a run for it. As prison escape plans go, wasn't exactly subtle, but it worked. The timing was also interesting. A soccer match was taking place around the same time, perfect for the prisoners to blend into the crowds. One of the men who escaped was Brian Bo Larson, a pretty notorious prisoner. This escape was only the beginning. In 2004, he managed to get out again by hiding in a container that was being transported out of the facility. Then in 2014, he used a hacksaw to cut through the bars of his cell, climbed onto the roof using rope ladders, and made his way down to the other side. All right, let's get paranormal for a minute. In 2017, a ghost hunting team visited Bodmin Jail in Cornwall, often called one of the UK's most haunted prisons. Paranormal investigators Tony Ferguson and his wife Bev were walking through the jail, calling out the empty corridors, trying to pick up any kind of response, when something strange happened behind them. They didn't notice it at the time, but when they checked the footage later, they saw this figure drifting across the end of the corridor. Here it is zoomed in if you didn't notice it. Yeah, there was definitely something there. The figure appeared right after Ferguson had called out the name William. That led them to believe it could be William Hampton, the last man executed at Bodmin Jail in 1909. Over 50 people were executed there in total before the prison was eventually shut down and later partially turned into a tourist site. Ferguson said the experience was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. It was insane. I've investigated many locations and seen many things, but never seen activity like this. I can't explain it, he said. Staff also checked the security cameras after the sighting and no one had entered the section of the corridor at the time the figure appeared. This next piece of security camera footage captured an inmate spider crawling toward a woman he was going to attack at a jail intake facility in Arizona. It happened at the Maricopa County Intake and Release Center, where men and women wait on opposite sides of a large processing room. One inmate, Justin Avery, slips out of view and drops to the ground. From there, he starts moving across the floor on his hands and feet. Reaches the far side of the intake area where female inmates are being held and ends up directly behind a woman who's asleep. And that's when another woman saw him and immediately yelled for him to get off her. Cops rushed in, of course, and dragged the guy to his cell, but it's crazy he was able to make it all the way over there with security right in the room. They later added mirrors to specific corners of the room to eliminate any blind spots. This CCTV footage comes from Campo Grande prison in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. A weird black shape was caught moving along the outer walls of the facility in the middle of the night. At first, guards watching the feed thought an inmate had found a way out, but this clearly was not a person. It drifts along the wall, then seems to move in and out of the wall, disappearing before reappearing again a short distance away. At moments it looks like it rises from the ground, then crawls along closed doors before fading back into the darkness. Campo Grande holds some of the most dangerous inmates in Brazil, and some wonder if this eerie dark shape could be the spirit of a former inmate. But, as always, What do you all think? This image here comes from Missouri State Penitentiary, an abandoned prison said to be one of the most haunted locations in the United States. The paranormal investigators who captured this never noticed it at the time. The prison opened back in 1836 and stayed active for more than 160 years, making it one of the longest-running maximum security prisons in the country. Over that time, it picked up a violent reputation. It even got labeled the bloodiest 47 acres in America after years of riots and deaths. Visitors and tour guides have reported things like footsteps in completely empty hallways, sudden loud banging coming from cell blocks, and the sound of doors slamming. Some say it feels like being watched, especially inside the older housing units and underground sections. One of the most talked about areas is the basement dungeon section, known for being pitch dark and extremely tight. People who go down there often describe a heavy feeling, like the air changes the second you step inside. There are also repeated stories about shadow figures appearing on the catwalks of the old cell blocks, and there's also said to be a figure near the control room area that appears and disappears in seconds, earning it the nickname Fast Jack.
We are starting off with the Black Dolphin Prison in Russia. If you're sent here, you'll never see the sky again. Located near the border with Kazakhstan, Black Dolphin Prison houses some of Russia's most violent criminals. Inmates are blindfolded during transport and held in stress positions when moved, ensuring they never learn the layout of the prison. They're locked in steel-barred cells inside more steel-barred cells and watched 24/7. Prisoners are never allowed to sit or lie down during the day, and they march bent at the waist anytime they're escorted, literally bent in half like animals. Escaping is virtually impossible, and conditions are so severe that former inmates say you'd be lucky to go insane, because the alternative is far worse. When the guards are more afraid of the inmates, you know it's bad. While Carandiru officially closed in 2002, its legacy still terrifies Brazil. At its height, it held over 8,000 inmates, more than double its capacity, and violence was routine. Disease ran rampant, and medical care was almost non-existent. But the most infamous event came in 1992, when a prison riot led to one of the worst massacres in prison history. Police stormed the facility and took the lives of 111 inmates in what many called an execution, not a riot response. The site was eventually demolished, but ex-prisoners and guards still speak of ghosts, and not just metaphorically. This isn't a prison, it's a death sentence with a few extra steps. Camp 22 is one of North Korea's most secretive and most feared facilities. Though the government denies its existence, satellite images and defectors have revealed what's happening. A massive complex where entire families are imprisoned for, quote, political crimes. Some people are born into the camp and never leave. Torment, starvation, and public executions are common, and one defector described how prisoners were used for chemical weapons testing. Others were worked to death in coal mines, collapsing from exhaustion and just buried where they fell. No due process, no trials, just an endless sentence for being associated with the wrong person. Even the guards feared walking its halls alone. During the 1980s, especially after Turkey's 1980 military coup, Diyarbakir prison became infamous for its use as a political prison. It's where Kurdish activists, students, and even young people were imprisoned and tormented. Conditions were so inhumane that several inmates set themselves on fire in protest. One documented method of punishment was called the wheel, where prisoners were harmed and then forced to lick each other's wounds. International human rights organizations have labeled it one of the worst prisons of the 20th century. You're alive, but buried. This Supermax facility in Colorado is considered one of the most secure prisons in America. It houses the worst of the worst, from Unabomber Ted Kaczynski to Worst Day in America conspirators. But the terror here isn't violence. It is the crushing silence. Inmates spend 23 hours a day alone in soundproof concrete cells. Human contact is almost non-existent, lights stay on 24/7, and meals are delivered through slots. Many prisoners reportedly begin hallucinating or develop severe mental illness within years of arrival. jail. Even hardened criminals have begged to be transferred anywhere else just to hear a voice again. This prison smells of death because many inside are already dying. Originally designed for 400 people, Gitarama swelled to around 7,000 during the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide. Prisoners slept standing up, packed in like cattle, but what made it truly horrifying was this. Prisoners stood barefoot on rotting flesh. Gangrene was so common that toes and limbs would just fall off. There were reports of inmates resorting to human consumption just to survive. Medical care? Forget it. Guards often refused to enter cell blocks, and some prisoners literally rotted to death while still breathing. Literally horrifying to think of, geez Louise.
In 2016, 3 inmates inside Orange County Men's Central Jail in California pulled off and escaped from a maximum security unit. They also did something very unusual. They filmed the whole thing. The breakout happened inside the jail's housing unit, where they managed to cut through the steel bars and crawl into the building's internal plumbing system. From there, they moved through the narrow maintenance spaces inside the walls, working their way upward toward the roof. At some point during the escape, they used a contraband cell phone to record what they were doing. Once they were on the roof, they used a makeshift rope to climb down the side of the building, 4 stories to the ground. Nobody noticed that they were gone until the next day. Once outside, they held a firearm up to a taxi driver outside of Target and forced him to drive. They stayed at the Flamingo Inn Motel for at least one night, then stole a utility van from a Craigslist seller in South Los Angeles during a test drive. The taxi and van were both used to travel up to San Jose, where they checked into another motel. They were caught the next day outside a McDonald's near Golden Gate Park after a short chase. Ever seen that creepy season 1 episode of The X-Files with the guy who can slip into really tight spaces? This is kind of the real life version of that. This CCTV footage comes from a prison in Russia in 2016. The prisoner, Rustam Shutrakhanov, is seen inside his cell with almost no clothing on, positioning himself in front of the small food hatch built into the door. He pushes his body head first into that tiny slot and starts squeezing through. His torso slowly disappears through the hatch. Then he gets stuck at the waist for a moment, wedged halfway between the cell and the corridor. Somehow, though, this dude forced himself forward and kept pushing until his entire body slid out the other side. Once he's through, he immediately grabs clothes that were left waiting on the outside of the door and starts getting dressed. Within minutes, he's fully clothed, casually walking away from the cell area. He was caught pretty quickly, but still, that was honestly pretty impressive. He soon earned the nickname Snake Man. Breaking out of prison doesn't always require months of planning. Sometimes it just comes down to spotting a brief opening and taking it. And that's what happened to Mike Maldonado. This happened at Porter County Jail during a prisoner transfer. Mike was inside a transport car in the secure entry area, where inmates were brought in and out of the facility. An officer stepped away from the vehicle to speak with another deputy nearby. For a moment, the car was left unattended, while the main gate was still in motion. It was an electric gate, still lowering into place. That's when Mike made his move. He suddenly got out of the car and ran straight toward the opening, managed to slip under the gate just in time. By the time it was fully shut, he'd already made it outside the secure area. Deputies searched the area for around 2 hours, but there was no sign of him. Later that same day, a stolen vehicle report was filed in the area. Of course, it led back to Maldonado. He was eventually located and arrested the following day. Finally, we have footage of one of the most notorious criminals in history making one of the most notorious prison escapes in history. In 2015, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman pulled off one of the most famous prison escapes in modern history from the Altiplano maximum security prison in Mexico. Started inside his cell, where surveillance cameras showed him pacing around before disappearing from view near the shower area. That's because a hole had been carved into the floor of the shower stall, leading straight down into a tunnel system hidden beneath the prison. From the surface, it looked like a normal drainage space. Below, something else entirely. The tunnel stretched for over a mile. It was fully built out. It had lighting, ventilation, and incredibly, a small rail system with a modified motorcycle cart used to move through it. El Chapo climbed down through the opening in his cell and entered the tunnel system waiting below. From there, he was moved through the underground passage all the way to a house outside the prison perimeter. The tunnel ended inside a construction site. By the time guards realized that he was gone, he'd already made it through the tunnel. Of course, he was later caught, is now serving his life sentence at ADX Florence in the US.
It was called the Kingdom of Death and Madness for a reason. Tadmor, located in the Syrian desert, became infamous under Hafez al-Assad's regime. One of the darkest moments in its history came in 1980 when soldiers stormed the prison after an assassination attempt on Assad. Over 1,000 prisoners had their lives taken, many in their sleep. Routine torment included the German chair, which apparently breaks the spine, electrocution, and beating prisoners until they lost control of bodily functions. Though it was reportedly closed in 2001, it was reopened during the Syrian civil war and became a house of horrors once again before finally being destroyed in 2015. A prison so overcrowded, inmates share beds in 6-hour shifts. Built in the 19th century, Kresty Prison in St. Petersburg was once Europe's largest jail, but in the Soviet era it became notorious for how it crammed inmates into tiny cells. Originally meant for 1,150 prisoners, it often held more than 10,000. Lice, tuberculosis, and people taking their own lives were common. Cells meant for 6 held up to 20, prisoners didn't sleep so much as rotate shifts in a single bed, violence was routine, and many inmates never even made it to trial before dying inside. It's now a museum, but the stories linger in the cracks of the cell walls. In here, the inmates run the prison, and that's not really a good thing. La Sabineta was one of Venezuela's most dangerous prisons until it shut down in 2013. Guards were so outnumbered they barely entered the wings. Gangs ran entire blocks, and if you didn't belong to one, you were prey. Weapons were handmade and plentiful, medical care was non-existent. A 2012 riot left 16 people dead in just one fight. And food? Well, you only got it if your gang controlled the kitchen. Diseases like tuberculosis spread fast, and if you collapsed in your cell, it might take days before anyone noticed that you had passed. Nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton, but it is no luxury stay, this maximum security Thai prison holds some of the country's most dangerous criminals, and many foreigners caught smuggling illicit substances. Upon arrival, prisoners wear leg irons for at least 3 months. Death row inmates wear them permanently. Cells are tiny and shared, often with no bedding. Inmates eat a single bowl of rice soup a day unless they can pay for better food, and medical treatment, well, only if you can afford it. Executions used to be done with high-powered weapons, but Thailand now uses lethal injection. Still, the conditions leading up to death are what haunt prisoners the most.
Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York has been operating since 1826. The prison is well known, not just for how long it's been around, but for the notorious inmates who've been housed there in the past, names like Al Capone and Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The facility sits on the banks of the Hudson River, and it makes for a pretty foreboding view. Another one of the darker things about Sing Sing is its history with capital punishment. The prison was home to an electric chair which was used until 1965. Over the years, a number of executions took place here, which definitely contributes to some of the legends that haunt the grounds. And just like with most American prisons, it has a violent reputation. With thousands of inmates over the years, conditions have been harsh. There's gang activity, fights, all the stuff you can look forward to if you happen to land yourself there. San Quentin State Prison in California is now called San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. It's a name most people have heard of. It was established in 1852, making it the oldest prison in the state, and it has quite the rep. San Quentin is especially notorious for its death row, which houses some of the most dangerous criminals in the United States. The prison has executed over 700 inmates, and 737 are currently sitting on death row. So the place has come up in discussions about capital punishment in America. Capital punishment is controversial, especially in the state of California though. The last inmate to die of lethal injection in California was in 2006 at San Quentin. The atmosphere at this prison is intense. It's housed some of the state's most hardened criminals, and inmates live under constant surveillance. This includes regular searches and strict routines, but even still, there's this ever-present threat of violence. Reports of inmate-on-inmate violence are common, and many staff members fear for their own safety as well. Aside from death row, San Quentin is known for some pretty infamous riots and escape attempts too, like the riot in 1971 that led to the deaths of several inmates and staff. Carandiru Penitentiary in Sao Paulo, Brazil was infamously one of the most violent prisons in the country. It opened in 1956, initially designed to hold around 3,000 inmates, but at one point it housed over 8,000. That's some severe overcrowding. There was a lack of sanitation, food shortages, and violence was all over the place. The prison was basically a powder keg waiting for a spark. And one of the most shocking events in Carandiru's history was the 1992 massacre. It began when a riot broke out in the prison and military police stormed the facility. In the aftermath, 111 inmates had been killed by police in what many considered an execution rather than a riot control operation. This crackdown brought international attention to the appalling conditions inside the prison, and after years of chaos and violence, Carandiru was officially closed in 2002. In fact, it wasn't just closed down, it was fully demolished, with only one block left intact to be used as a museum. La Santé prison in Paris has earned a reputation as one of the most notorious prisons in Europe. It opened in 1867 and has housed a number of high-profile inmates, including political prisoners and infamous criminals. La Santé has been known for overcrowding, especially in the 20th century. Many inmates report living in cramped cells, sometimes sharing space meant for one person with multiple others. The facilities are old and in many cases deteriorating, sanitation issues are common, and the prison has faced criticism for inadequate medical care and mental health support for the inmates. This has made La Santé a breeding ground for violence. Over the years, nearly 40 inmates have taken their lives here. And a little piece of history for you, but the second last public execution in France took place outside this prison in 1939. A lot of inmates have attempted escaping from here, and a good number of these escape attempts have ended violently. In 1971, inmates Roger Bontemps and Claude Buffet took hostages during their escape, hostages that they ended up killing. The two inmates died by guillotine for their crimes. ADX Florence in Colorado is often referred to as the Florence Supermax, or the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The facility was designed to lock in some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. It opened in 1995 after two inmates housed in the United States Penitentiary Marion took the lives of two prison guards, and this happened just 3 hours apart. The guards' deaths were blamed on the poor prison design, and it was decided that a new facility had to be built for the most dangerous and uncontrollable inmates. ADX Florence is a high security prison that houses inmates who pose extreme security risks and are deemed to have absolutely no concern for human life. The prison is known for its strict control and isolation methods. Inmates spend most of their time in their cells, which are essentially small concrete boxes with only a slit for a window. This is meant to prevent the inmates from knowing their exact location within the facility, which of course helps prevent any escape attempts and minimizes the interactions inmates have with each other. Anytime the inmates are out of their cells, it's usually reserved for exercise, but even that is done in isolated cages. Guards are heavily armed and every move is monitored by cameras. Any sign of defiance can lead to severe punishment. Next up, we have Bang Kwang Central Prison in Thailand. So this place is known for its very strict conditions. It's often ironically referred to as the Bangkok Hilton. This is a high security prison in Nonthaburi, Thailand. It's one of the most notorious prisons in the country. To put it plainly, Bang Kwang has a reputation for being pretty tough. It houses a mix of inmates from common criminals to those on death row, serving long sentences or facing severe penalties. The conditions inside are often very harsh, with overcrowding being a persistent issue. Famously, for the first 3 months of an inmate's sentence, they are chained to leg irons, and those awaiting death row used to be welded into them permanently, but that practice has since been banned. Bang Kwang is also famous for its implementation, of course, of the death penalty. Thailand has very strict special substances laws, and these types of offenses can result in very severe punishments, including death. La Sante Prison. This is a notorious French prison known for its overcrowded and harsh conditions. It's a bit of a redundant. I've never heard of overcrowding being a good thing. So from now on, if I say overcrowded, it's bad. It's bad. In straightforward terms, La Santa has gained a reputation for being a tough place. Constructed in the 19th century, it has faced issues related to its aging infrastructure and insufficient space for its inmates. Overcrowding has been persistent, leading to concerns about the well-being of these prisoners. The prison has been criticized for its tough disciplinary measures as well, and reports of violence among inmates is not uncommon. Inmates have sometimes protested against these conditions, drawing attention to the challenges they face inside the facility, but the harsh environment mixed with the psychological toll of incarceration has also led to a number of inmates taking their own lives. Now, efforts have apparently been made to address some of these problems, including renovations and updates to the prison, but I probably wouldn't be adding this to my list of places to check out if I were visiting France. Want to see some dark stuff? Go to the Paris catacombs or something. The dead don't scare me nearly as much as the living. Next up is Carandiru Penitentiary in Brazil. Now, this place actually closed in 2002, but its history of violence and overcrowding made it absolutely infamous. Located in Sao Paulo, it has a dark and notorious history that reached its peak with a very tragic event that became known as the Carandiru Massacre. It was built in 1956. The prison became one of the largest in Latin America, designed to house around 3,000 inmates, but it often held more than double that number. And anytime you have overcrowding on that kind of scale, tension and violence is almost unavoidable. On October 2nd of 1992, a riot erupted. In response, the police were called in to regain control, but the situation very quickly spiraled out of control, resulting in what is now known as the aforementioned Carandiru Massacre. Military police entered the prison, and in the ensuing chaos, 111 inmates lost their lives, most of them unarmed and in their cells. The prison was eventually closed in 2002, and the remaining inmates were transferred to other facilities. Taking the next spot on list is Black Beach in Equatorial Guinea. This is said to be one of Africa's most notorious prisons. Yes, out of the entire continent. That's saying a lot. The prison was built during the Spanish colonial rule in the 1940s. Initially, it mostly held petty criminals, but by 1968, with the independence of the country, it started housing political prisoners as well, many of whom died in the prison. Wonder how. The biggest problem with this place is neglect. Prisoners are often denied basic amenities like food and healthcare. Many prisoners are also violently tormented. And we're gonna finish things off with Urumqi number 3 detention center in Dabancheng, China. This is the largest detention center not only in China but possibly the entire world. If you think some of the inmates numbers I've mentioned so far are a lot, this place dwarfs them all. This detention center holds about 10,000 inmates or more if they were really jammed in there, like most of the prisons on this list. That's just an estimate based on satellite imagery and from what little reporters have seen from the inside. Chinese authorities keep a lot of stuff hush-hush, including the exact number of inmates currently housed there. But the place is 220 acres, twice the size of Vatican City. That sounds like a dystopian sci-fi movie kind of prison. The prison also holds what are referred to as vocational training centers, which have been described by former prisoners as brutal internment camps. And there's a specific group that is being targeted the worst, an ethnic minority in China called the Uyghurs, who are basically being thrust into these camps to do forced labor, which the government, of course, denies. Next, we have Bangu Prison in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This prison is infamous for its overcrowding and violence. Bangu opened in the early 1900s and has long been at the center of crime and corruption in the Brazilian penal system. The facility was originally built to house 1,500 inmates, but at times it's held more than triple that number, which makes for horrendous living conditions. The overcrowding has resulted in unsanitary environments and limited access to basic necessities like food and medical care. And it doesn't help that gangs control different sections of the prison. And when I say control, I mean like they control it. Prison guards are paid off by them. Not surprising that fights and riots are common. In 2004, a series of riots led to the deaths of over 30 inmates. It's clear that authorities just struggle to maintain order here. There's just too much corruption far too much organized crime. Gitarama prison in Rwanda is now called Muhanga prison. Apparently, it's not as bad as it was, but it was pretty bad. And it's hard to find any definitive information on this because the government kind of downplays how bad things really are or were here. This facility was notorious for extreme overcrowding. And I've said that a lot on this list, but in this case, my God, it really is next level overcrowded. It was built to hold about 400 inmates apparently, but often housed over 7,000, leading to some of the most horrendous living situations imaginable. When you look at footage of this place, it's just nightmarish. Inmates would be crammed into small spaces with little to no ventilation. Many were forced to sleep on the bare floor on top of each other. There's virtually no sanitation, leading to disease outbreaks as well. And the lack of proper food was so bad that some were actually forced to eat the remains of dead inmates. That is about as horrific as it gets. Not only are you facing the challenge of surviving all the violence that comes in a prison and all the overcrowding, but the illness as well. Malnutrition, lack of medical attention has led to a significant number of preventable deaths at the prison. At one point, it was estimated that half a dozen or so prisoners were dying on a daily basis. Bang Kwang Central Prison in Thailand is often referred to as the Bangkok Hilton, which is a sarcastic nickname. This is not a place you want to be. The prison has a reputation for being one of the toughest in the country. It was established to hold high-profile and dangerous criminals, but also houses a significant number of foreign inmates, many of whom are serving time for illicit substance offenses. Bang Kwang is notorious for its brutal conditions. Overcrowding is a bit of an issue here, and inmates often live in cramped quarters with limited personal space. It also houses Thailand's main death row and execution chamber. The prison is known for its harsh discipline methods. If you step out of line, you can expect some pretty severe consequences, which can include solitary confinement or even physical punishment. And for the first 3 months of your sentence, you're required to wear leg irons. Death row inmates used to have theirs permanently welded on, but that hasn't been the case since 2013. Now, let's dive into the unsettling world of black jails in China. These facilities are not officially recognized as prisons. They operate outside any legal framework. Black jails are used primarily to detain petitioners seeking justice for grievances that have been ignored at the local level. Now, instead of being dealt with through formal legal channels though, these people find themselves abducted by security forces and held in these secretive makeshift facilities, black jails. The concept of black jails came about after the Chinese government abolished a previous detention system in 2003. Since then, these extra-legal centers have become a solution for authorities overwhelmed by the sheer number of people attempting to petition for their rights. Located in various types of buildings, from state-owned hotels to government offices, black jails can be found in major cities, particularly in Beijing. Human rights groups estimate there are between 7 and 50 of these facilities in operation, but it's hard to tell the exact number because of obvious reasons. Inside these jails, conditions are said to be absolutely horrifying. I mean, you can only imagine what goes on in a secret facility operating outside the law. There have been disturbing incidents involving SA in these facilities. In one case, a guard was sentenced to 8 years for his attack on a female petitioner. At least he did go to jail though. The authorities employ interceptors, or black guards, to capture and transport petitioners back to their hometowns, stripping them of their possessions in the process. Despite numerous reports from human rights organizations, though, the Chinese government has consistently denied the existence of black jails. And finally, we have Black Dolphin Prison in Russia, often cited as one of the most brutal correctional facilities in the world. It houses some of the country's most dangerous criminals, including killers and serial offenders. The reputation of Black Dolphin is built on its extreme security measures and harsh treatment of its inmates. One of the first things you'll notice about Black Dolphin, if you're ever unlucky enough to go there, is its high-tech security. The prison is surrounded by thick walls and barbed wire, and it's equipped with watchtowers manned by guards with firearms. Inside, life for the inmates is grim. They're confined to tiny cells where they spend up to 23 hours a day. Each cell typically houses 2 inmates, but they're kept under strict rules that prevent them from interacting with one another. The isolation is meant to keep tensions low and minimize conflicts, but it can drive people to the brink of a madness. Daily routines are rigidly controlled, and the psychological strain must be incredibly intense. Inmates are required to maintain a low profile, following commands without question. Any sign of defiance can result in punishment, including solitary confinement or physical violence. Inmates can also be subjected to a practice called the crawl, where they move on their hands and knees while being monitored. The crawl is done to dehumanize the prisoners, to remind them of the power dynamic within the prison. All right, you want unbelievable prison escapes? Here's a story for you. On January 3rd, 1995, 3 inmates at HM Prison Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight in England broke out. Andrew Roger, Keith Rose, and Matthew Williams had been working in the prison workshop, which gave them access to sheet metal and tools. At some point, one of them got a good enough look at a guard's master key to memorize the shape of it. Memorized it so well, he was somehow able to cut a working copy out of it in the workshop. I mean, how in the hell? Was this like one of those big blocky cartoon keys, like just the 2 square shapes? Anyway, they also built a ladder, which they managed to keep hidden inside the prison. When the time came, they used both to move through the internal doors and barriers without immediately setting anything off. They got out of the building and headed to a nearby town with a specific plan: steal a small plane and fly to the mainland. Well, that didn't work. They couldn't get the aircraft started, so they ditched it and hid in a garden shed instead. They stayed there for 5 days, and then an off-duty prison officer spotted them, and they were arrested and brought back. In 1965, Lester Eubanks was convicted in Ohio for taking the life of a young girl named Mary Eileen Denier. He was originally sentenced to death, but that got reduced to life in prison in 1972. By late 1973, he'd kept a clean enough record that he was placed in an honor program for well-behaved inmates. Well, that program is exactly how he got out. On December 7th, 1973, Eubanks was taken out of the prison for a supervised Christmas shopping trip to a mall in Columbus. He wasn't in restraints, wasn't being closely watched. The group was basically free to just walk around the mall. So at some point, Eubanks just walked away. Why the hell wouldn't you? You're already in for life. You don't really have anything to lose. I mean, what genius came up with this insane idea? And guess what? He's never been found. The thinking is that someone was waiting for him, and he was picked up by an associate and driven far away, probably disappeared under a different name. Decades later, he's still on the U.S. Marshal's most wanted list. Glenn Godwin was sent to prison in California after a violent robbery in 1980. He ended up at Folsom State Prison by 1987. Maximum security, so not easy to get out of, but he got out anyway. Godwin had access to a maintenance area where there were tools and less supervision. He cut through fence wire and got into a storm drain on the prison grounds, then crawled through about 750 feet of completely dark tunnel until he came out near the American River. A raft was waiting for him on the other side. He floated across and disappeared. Investigators found that parts of the route had already been cut before he got there. The whole thing was obviously very well coordinated. Someone on the outside helped set this up. He was gone before anyone even knew what had happened. In 1989, he was arrested in Mexico on weapons charges, but in 1991, he escaped from that Mexican prison too. After that second escape, he was never found again. Ahmed Tavili was sitting in a maximum security facility in British Columbia in 2007, waiting to be extradited to the United States on serious organized crime charges. The extradition was moving forward, and it wasn't looking good for him. But on November 16, 2007, he paid his way out. He handed a correctional officer around $50,000 to help him escape. An officer dressed him in a janitor's uniform, walked him through the prison, and let him out the front door. The officer was arrested shortly after, because of course he was. There's like security cameras everywhere. And they see you walking him out? What the hell was this guy on? Anyway, Tavili was already gone though. There were some indirect signs that he stayed in contact with people connected to his case, but nothing that showed where he actually went. And to this day, he is still at large. In 1958, Leslie Arnold was 16 years old when he took the lives of both of his parents in Nebraska. He got a life sentence, but after about a decade inside, he was considered low risk and had a bit more freedom in the facility. On July 14, 1967, Arnold and another inmate cut through the bars in a music room inside the Nebraska State Penitentiary. They reached the outer perimeter and climbed a 12-foot fence with barbed wire at the top. Once over, they were gone. The other inmate was caught the following year. Arnold was never found. They were both reportedly spotted in Chicago shortly after the escape, and that's where they split up. After that, the trail on Arnold just disappeared. Later turned out he lived under different names across the United States for years, eventually moved abroad and ended up settling in Australia, where he lived quietly until he died in 2010. His real identity wasn't confirmed until DNA testing connected him back to the escape. Pascal Payet was a French inmate serving a long sentence for a violent armed robbery. He'd already broken out once in 2001, and while still on the run, helped plan a helicopter breakout in 2003 that freed other inmates. Because of all that, by 2007 he was under heavy surveillance and being moved between facilities constantly to make any further escapes all that much harder. Didn't matter. On July 14th, 2007, 4 masked men hijacked a helicopter and forced the pilot to fly to the prison in southern France where he was being held. They landed right at the facility, got inside, reached Payet's unit, and pulled him out. The whole thing took minutes. They loaded him onto the helicopter and flew off. The pilot was luckily released unharmed after they landed. A huge manhunt went across Europe. Payet was caught in Spain in September 2007, about 2 months after the escape, and was brought back to France. The first prisoner escaped with the help of his wife, a helicopter, and some fruit. Nadine Vajour was so determined to get her husband out of a Paris prison, she took helicopter flight lessons. Her husband, Michel Vajour, was serving a lengthy sentence for armed robbery. Well, in May 1986, the Chicago Tribune reported that there had been an escape. Part of the story read that Michael Vajour, quote, forced his way onto the prison's roof by wielding nectarines that were painted to look like grenades. I wish there was a picture of these. I mean, they must have looked really realistic, but I mean, that is insane. Once he made it up there, his wife picked him up in a helicopter and they flew off before landing on a football field and driving away by car. What is with France and prison escapes on helicopters? In part 1, I covered this guy who escaped multiple times in France in prisons from a helicopter. What's going on? And I think there's more cases too. Anyway, it's the type of thing you'd only see in a John Woo action movie, but they were not on the run for long. Nadine was tracked down and arrested in southwestern France. Michel stayed free for a bit longer, but he was later fired at during another bank robbery. He survived, but was of course sent right back to prison. In 2012, Ronald Silva, a Brazilian trafficker of illicit substances that cannot be named on YouTube, he pulled off a pretty insane prison escape using the power of drag. During a visit, his wife showed up and swapped clothes with him. She handed over what she was wearing and changed into spare clothes she'd brought in her bag. Silva didn't just throw on the outfit and walk out. He shaved his entire body, put on makeup, fake nails, and a wig to match the disguise. All he needed to do was to pass as his wife and then walk straight past the guards at the exit. But being that this isn't an Adam Sandler movie, this was probably gonna fail spectacularly, especially because his disguise was not convincing. I'll just say that. Well, somehow it didn't fail spectacularly. Somehow he actually made it out without being stopped and got onto the street. He didn't blend in for long though. As he headed toward a bus stop, a police officer noticed that he was having trouble walking. Yeah, the heels were apparently what gave him away. Next up is Richard McNair. Started in 1987 in Minot, North Dakota. McNair was breaking into a home when he ran into 2 men inside. Things escalated. He fired at both of them. One was badly injured, the other died. He was taken in for questioning in February 1988 and confessed. While being held at a police station though, he escaped. Officers caught him a few hours later. Even after being handcuffed to a chair, he managed to get free using lip balm to slide out of the cuffs and took off running again. He was caught shortly after that second escape. In 1992, while serving time at the North Dakota State Penitentiary, he escaped again with 2 other inmates. That one also didn't last long though. He was caught within hours. But that's not even the end, because his most well-known escape happened in 2006 at a federal prison in Louisiana. He managed to hide himself inside a pallet of materials that was being shipped out of the prison. At one point after escaping, a police officer came across him a few blocks away, and McNair just talked his way out of it by pretending he was a jogger passing through. He stayed free for about 10 months. During that time, he used fake identities, kept moving around, and eventually made his way into Canada, but he was finally caught again in 2007 and has not escaped since. This next prisoner ended up being nicknamed the Snake Man. The security footage you're looking at comes from a prison in Russia in 2016. Prisoner Rustam Shukratinov is seen inside his cell with almost no clothing on, lining himself up at the front of a small food hatch built into the door. He then tries something really shouldn't work. He just pushes his head and shoulders into the hatch and starts forcing his way through the opening. He gets stuck around the waist, wedged halfway between the cell and the corridor, and now you're like, alright, that's it. It's jammed in there, it's a valiant effort, but ultimately this is gonna be a fail, except that's not what happens. He just keeps pushing bit by bit until he forces himself forward, and he's through. Once he's out, he immediately reaches for a set of clothes that have been left right outside the door, and he puts them on. Within a couple minutes, he's fully dressed, walking away from the cell area. He was caught not long after, but this is still an incredible feat. Jack Shepherd was a London thief in the early 1700s, but what made him famous wasn't really the thefts, it was all his daring prison escapes. I'm surprised no one's made a modern movie about this guy's life yet. There's like one from 1969. I think this needs an update. So in 1724, he's arrested multiple times and managed to break out of prison 4 different times in the same year. In his first escape, he and a woman named Edgeworth Bess used tools and makeshift ropes made out of bed sheets to get out. They lowered themselves down from the building like Rapunzel. The two were captured, but later that same year, Jack escaped from Newgate prison, which was supposed to be nearly impossible to break out of. He'd been chained up and locked in heavy restraints, but somehow he still managed to slip his hands free, climb through parts of the prison, and force his way through multiple locked doors to reach the roof. From there, he used a blanket to climb down to a nearby building and get onto the street. He was captured again shortly after and taken back to Newgate. By this point, security had been tightened even more. But when a big fight broke out during court proceedings happening nearby, the prison suddenly went into chaos. Guards were distracted and doors weren't being watched properly, so Jack took advantage, breaking free again and slipping out during the confusion. He was caught a final time and he was executed later that year. This is footage of an inmate named Derek Estelle, who escaped from Garland County Detention Center in Arkansas in July 2013. The escape started with a setup inside the booking area. So another inmate inside the jail began distracting deputies, pulling them away from the intake window. At the same time, a man outside the jail was also helping pull attention away from the booking area. Once the deputies moved away from the window, Estelle took his chance. He ran to the booking counter, jumped it, and went straight for a small service window that led outside. He squeezed through and got out into the open area before officers could stop him. Outside, a car was already waiting in the parking lot. A woman was behind the wheel, but the door opened. Estelle got in, and the car took off. The getaway car was later found abandoned shortly after the escape. Manhunt started right away. Derek didn't stay hidden for long. He was later linked to a wider string of crimes during the time that he was on the run, including armed robbery and carjacking. He was eventually tracked down and arrested in Florida the following month. Kicking off the list with Bodmin Jail in Cornwall, England. This formidable structure was erected in 1779 and served as a functioning prison for over 150 years, closing in 1927. Throughout its operation, the jail was the site of countless punishments and prisoners being put to death. The belief that the place is haunted is due to the grim conditions and traumatic events that occurred within its walls. Over the years, the prison housed inmates enduring overcrowding, harsh labor, and inhumane treatment. One of the most well-known spirits believed to haunt Bodmin Jail is that of Selina Wadge, a young woman convicted of infanticide in the 19th century. It's said that her tormented spirit wanders through the prison, and visitors and paranormal investigators have reported hearing her cries and witnessing apparitions resembling her. The jail's chapel, where prisoners' unalivings took place, is another hotspot for paranormal activity. Visitors have reported unexplained voices and an overwhelming sense of doom while inside of the area. Number 9, Bang Kwang Central Prison. Situated in the outskirts of Bangkok, Thailand, this place is still operational, notorious for its harsh conditions. Even though some particularly brutal practices have been banned, the facility was constructed to incarcerate extremely dangerous criminals, and a significant portion of them are on death row. One of the prison's infamous practices involves chaining inmates to leg irons during their first 3 months of their sentence. For those on death row, these leg irons are permanently welded onto them. Often referred to as Big Tiger, Bang Kwang Central Prison lives up to its nickname as locals describe how it engulfs its inmates in a seemingly relentless cycle of suffering, almost like a death factory. The conditions inside the prison are harsh, with overcrowded cells, limited access to medical care, and inadequate sanitation. Inmates are often subjected to extreme heat and substandard food quality. And while some improvements have again been made to address these concerns, the prison remains a place to avoid at all costs. The psychological toll of confinement, the presence of death row, the severe living conditions, it just makes this prison a place you dread spending even a single hour in, let alone a night. Strongly advised you steer clear of this prison if you value your well-being, and if you've committed any crimes in Bangkok. Next on the list we have Holmesburg Prison. Holmesburg Prison, infamously known as the Terror Dome, became notorious for being the site of a number of highly unethical scientific experiments conducted on its inmates. These experiments were so inhumane that it's difficult to believe that stuff like this actually took place. This is like something you'd see in a Blumhouse movie. These experiments were overseen by Dr. Albert Kligman, a dermatologist who is basically a real-life mad scientist. Inmates, often driven by desperation and the promise of earning a meager sum of money, volunteered to be subjects in these experiments. Dr. Kligman subjected them to a wide range of horrifying stuff like exposure to microwave radiation, infection with various skin diseases, and biochemical experiments involving substances like dioxin, which was used in Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. Dr. Kligman was quoted describing how he felt the first time he arrived at the prison, and in his words, "All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time." The conditions at Holmesburg Prison were horrific, to say the least, and the experiments conducted within its walls were a clear violation of very basic ethical standards. Number 7, La Sabaneta Prison. La Sabaneta Prison in Zulia, Venezuela earned a notorious reputation for its extreme levels of corruption and just deplorable conditions. Within its walls, reports of extortion and rampant violence were disturbingly common. The prison was effectively under the control of various gangs and criminal organizations, essentially operated by inmates themselves. Inmates within the prison often found themselves coerced into paying protection fees to these groups merely to secure access to basic necessities like food and water. Corruption ran rampant throughout the prison, with both guards and officials often accepting bribes to turn a blind eye to the activities of the prisoners. The inhumane conditions at this prison prompted outrage from human rights organizations and the United Nations, leading to widespread calls for its closure, and the prison's environment was so poor that visiting it would have been strongly discouraged. In response to this escalating crisis and massive riot in which over 50 individuals lost their lives back in 2013, the Venezuelan government finally announced plans to shut down the prison. Inmates were transferred to alternative places, marking the end of an era of unimaginable suffering and brutality. Next up is Shepton Mallet. Shepton Mallet Prison in Somerset, England is renowned as one of the world's most haunted prisons. Its construction finished up in 1910, and it remained in active operation until 1990, changing ownership multiple times during its existence. At one point it served as a military prison under both British and American control during World War II, before reverting to British authority afterward. Once again, the prison is believed to hold the lingering spirits of past inmates who endured unimaginable suffering within it, where numerous executions by hanging occurred. The prison's haunting history and the countless lives that were affected by its harsh conditions make it a pretty foreboding and unsettling place for sure. In December 2012, 2 inmates, Joseph Jose Banks and Kenneth Conley, escaped from the Metropolitan Correctional Center in downtown Chicago. They're both being held on bank robbery charges and shared the same cell on the 17th floor. During the night, they worked on a section of their cell window, managed to break out part of the window opening and remove metal bars, which they hid inside the cell. To cover what they were doing, they stuffed their bed sheets with clothes so it looked like they were still sleeping. Once everything was ready, they squeezed out through the narrow window opening and got onto the outside wall of the building. From there, they used a rope they'd made out of bed sheets to climb down the side. They made it down and got away from the building, and then were seen on surveillance footage getting into a taxi a short distance away. The escape hadn't been discovered until the next morning, when staff noticed the rope still hanging from the building. After the escape, a massive manhunt started across Chicago. Banks was caught first, just a few days after. Conley stayed on the run longer, though. He made it about 2 weeks before police tracked him down in the Chicago suburbs and arrested him. Both were later charged for the escape itself on top of their original bank robbery cases. HM Prison Maze in Northern Ireland was one of the most heavily secured prisons in Europe at the time. Multiple fences, guard towers, and a full military presence around the outside. But on September 25th, 1983, a large group of inmates carried out what would become one of the most notorious prison escapes in UK history. It started inside the block. Some of the prisoners had managed to get hold of weapons inside the prison and use them to take control of the unit. Prison officers in that section were taken hostage, and the inmates basically controlled the entire wing. Once they had that part of the prison, they moved on to the next step. A delivery truck that regularly came into the prison was forced into the plant. Officers were made to open the way. The truck was used as part of the route toward the main gate. As things spread through the prison, more officers were overpowered in different areas. Some inmates even put on prison officer uniforms they'd taken earlier to blend into the movement inside. By the time alarms went off, it was chaos. A large group of prisoners were moving through the internal gates, pushing toward the outer fence. But in total, 38 inmates got out of the prison that day, making it one of the biggest prison escapes in European history. Now, this is an incredible story. So, during World War II, Colditz Castle in eastern Germany was turned into a POW camp. A lot of the men sent here were not first-timers. A lot of them had already tried escaping from other camps before being moved there. Specifically, they were seen as escape risks. Even with all that security, escape attempts kept happening. Some actually worked, most didn't. After March 1944, 50 prisoners were killed after a large breakout attempt from another camp known as Stalag Luft 3, events later called the Great Escape. Well, after that, British intelligence advised prisoners to just stop trying anything too ambitious. But inside Colditz, a small group wasn't ready to give up. Instead of scaling walls or digging tunnels, they started building a glider. The group included British pilots Bill Goldfinch and Jack Best, along with Tony Rold, who'd been a racing driver before the war. They worked in this hidden attic space inside the castle, slowly building the two-person glider using scavenged wood, bed slats, and electrical wiring. Their plan? Launch off the roof of the castle and just glide down to freedom. Before they ever got a chance to try it, though, the castle was liberated by the Allies in April 1945. Decades later, in 2000, a full-size replica of the glider was built and actually flown in England, with some of the original prisoners there to see it finally take flight. John Dillinger was one of the most wanted criminals in the United States during the 1930s, and even getting locked up didn't slow him down. In 1934, he was being held in Lake County Jail in Indiana, where he managed to carve a fake pew-pew out of wood. He then painted it black so it looked real. During a transfer, Dillinger pulled his little replica firearm on the guards and forced them to lock themselves in a cell before he drove off in a sheriff's car. That escape made him one of the most wanted men in the country at the time and pushed the FBI into this massive nationwide manhunt. And he stayed on the run for a while. It's a few more months before he was finally tracked down and killed later that same year outside a movie theater in Chicago. Kicking off the list with Patak Island Prison in Russia. So this prison is known for its incredibly harsh conditions and isolation from the mainland. Yeah, stuck on an island prison. That's bad. Bad for the prisoners, anyway. Just makes it a little harder to escape. So I guess good for everyone else. This place has a nickname, though, that would probably send a shiver up your spine if you were going there, and not just because you'd be in Russia. It's often referred to as the Alcatraz of Russia, which is not a compliment. If you refer to something or someone as the Alcatraz of whatever, you are insulting that person or place. Don't do that. Be nice. But the name does fit for this particular location. This island hellhole holds some of the most dangerous criminals in Russia, and they spend 22 and a half hours of the day cooped up in their cells. 22 out of 24 hours. That's a fair chunk of the day. Oh, and if prisoners happen to break any of the strict rules in place, they're sent to a small dark room in total isolation for up to 15 days straight. That's just the tip of the iceberg, too. Don't forget to tap that subscribe button if you are enjoying our content. We have plenty more coming your way on the daily. Next up on the list is what is often referred to as the most dangerous prison in the United States, ADX Florence. It was built back in 1994 and is what is known as a supermax prison. The place houses some of the biggest and baddest criminals in the country, ones that pose a severe threat of violence to staff and other inmates and just need extra security, more than you'd get in even a maximum security prison. But how do you get more extreme than maximum security? Maximum means this is it, you've reached the wall, you're at the max. Apparently you just add super to the title. It's not just maximum, super maximum. One step above that, I guess, would be mega maximum prison, which doesn't exist yet. I imagine that's when we'll start putting people in with actual superpowers. Prisoners here are under watch though 24/7 and spend almost the entirety of their day in single cells. Some prisoners here are even barred from speaking privately with their own lawyers or family members, because I guess that's just how dangerous they are. They could just talk their way out of prison. Next up, we have a political prison camp infamous for its extreme human rights abuses, Camp 22 in North Korea. Not only would you never want to visit this place in case you did something wrong and ended up actually being detained yourself, but it's also in North Korea, so good luck even getting into the country. I mean, yeah, what can I say? It's a prison camp. Only time camp is good in a sentence, I'm learning, is when it has the word summer right before it. Pretty much any other kind of camp is not where you want to be. Based on the little information that's gotten out about this place, it sounds like hell. And remember, this is North Korea, so there's a lot kept under wraps. If the stuff I'm talking about here sounds bad, you know there are things going on that are 10 times worse in there. So a former prison guard actually talked about the state he'd seen some of the prisoners in, and it's pretty horrific. Not sure how much detail we can really get into here, but according to him, about 30% of the prisoners had life-altering deformities due to all the mistreatment. Missing ears, faces covered in cuts and bruises. Many were underfed, just completely inhumane. The saddest part is, though, not even really surprising. This is just what comes along with living under a totalitarian regime. Next up, we have Attica Correctional Facility. This prison is in Attica, New York, and became famous for the 1971 Attica prison riot. The facility was built in the 30s, and by the 70s, it had become severely overcrowded with harsh living conditions. The breaking point came in September of 1971 when prisoners revolted, protesting against the inhumane treatment by prison staff and generally poor living conditions. The riot lasted for 4 days and it turned violent. In the end, the New York State Police were called in to regain control. The aftermath was brutal. During the retaking of the prison, law enforcement officers shot both inmates and hostages accidentally, and total 43 people lost their lives. 10 hostages and 33 inmates. Many others were also injured. Attica became a symbol of prison brutality and sparked debates about the treatment of prisoners. And the incident led to some changes in prison policies, but it also exposed deep-rooted issues in the US prison system. It's certainly not as dangerous now as many of the other prisons on this list, but the history of the place has definitely left an impression. Next, we head to Syria to explore Tadmor prison without actually going there. So, the wonders of the internet. This place is infamous for its brutal treatment of prisoners. Definitely has a grim reputation. Built in the 1960s, it's located in the desert near Palermo. The prison became rather infamous because of how bad its inmates were treated. Political prisoners in particular. There was overcrowding, extreme abuse. In 1980, a horrific event unfolded known as the Tadmor Prison Massacre. The Syrian government cracked down on prisoners, resulting in the deaths of hundreds, maybe even thousands. The exact number is still a bit unclear because of the secretive nature of the Syrian regime. A paramilitary force known as the Defense Brigade entered the prison at dawn and attacked prisoners in their cells. After the massacre, the prison continued to be a symbol of terror. In 2001, the Syrian government officially closed Tadmor, but reports suggest that parts of the facility were still in use for detaining political prisoners. In at our number 5 spot is the West Virginia Penitentiary. Established in 1866, the prison operated for over a century before finally closing its doors in 1995. During its long history, the penitentiary saw tons of unalivings of prisoners, both by hanging and later by electric chair. Inmates also endured overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, and brutal treatment, leading to numerous grievances. And the prison saw a number of riots, escape attempts, and inmate violence was happening on a constant basis. One of the most famous ghostly residents is believed to be that of R.D. Wall, an inmate who lost his life during a 1929 prison riot. Visitors and paranormal investigators have reported hearing unexplained footsteps, disembodied voices, and sightings of a shadowy figure roaming the premises. The infamous Sugar Shack, a building used for solitary confinement and corporal punishment, is said to be particularly active with paranormal phenomena. At number 4, we have the Ohio State Reformatory. Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio. Built between 1886 and 1910, this ominous building served as a prison for over a century until its closure in 1990. The prison was designed to rehabilitate young offenders, but its harsh conditions, overcrowding, and reports of violence gave it a dark reputation. Over the years, numerous prisoners endured the harsh conditions of the prison. Some met their end there. The prison saw its share of deaths, including those resulting from disease, accidents, and violence. One of the most famous reported hauntings at the prison involves the ghostly presence of the former warden and his wife, Helen. Visitors have claimed to experience encounters with these spirits, particularly in the warden's former office. They describe smelling Helen's perfume, and some have reported hearing ghostly voices, as if the spirits of the warden and his wife continue to linger, arguing from beyond the grave. These reported encounters have made Ohio State Reformatory a popular destination for paranormal enthusiasts and ghost hunters, but if you value a good night's sleep free from specters and spooks, just hit up a hotel instead. Knowing Ohio, though, it would probably be haunted too, or plagued by some weird cryptid. Next on the list is Maxwell Street Police Station. The Maxwell Street Police Station in Chicago, built in 1888 as a response to rising violence and crime in the neighborhood, has a dark history that has led it to being known as one of the most haunted places in the state. Over time, the police force meant to protect the community became infamous for their own brutality, and horrifying stories started to emerge regarding the treatment of inmates housed in the station's cells, particularly in the basement. Inmates at the Maxwell Street Police Station endured nightmarish torture at the hands of officers, often for the amusement of those in charge. And as these horrifying stories started getting around on the street, the station earned a bad reputation, being given several unsettling nicknames: the Old Red Fortress, Bloody Maxwell, and the wickedest police district in the world, to name just a few. Many visitors and paranormal enthusiasts have reported these eerie encounters within the station, especially in the basement, where inmates were subject to their torment. Unexplained sounds, voices, and sensations have been described, leading some to believe that these restless spirits of the prisoners continue to haunt the building. Number 2, the Tower of London. One of the most famous haunted locations in the world. Founded in 1066 by William the Conqueror, it has served various purposes throughout the years: a royal residence, a fortress, and a prison. The tower's reputation as a place of imprisonment and execution, particularly during the Tudor period, is what leads many to believe that the place is just brimming with ghosts. One of the most famous ghosts said to roam the tower is that of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry. Anne Boleyn was infamously unalived within the tower's walls in 1536, accused of adultery and treason. Her ghost is often reported near the site of her death, with visitors claiming to have seen her headless apparition wandering the grounds. Another ghostly resident is Lady Jane Grey, the tragic 9 Days Queen who was held captive at the tower and ultimately lost her life in 1554. Her spirit is believed to haunt the tower's corridors, and sightings describe a semi-translucent figure dressed in white, mourning her untimely fate. And the tower also holds the legends of the ghostly White Lady, believed to be the spirit of Arbella Stuart, a cousin of King James I. Arbella was imprisoned in the tower for her claim to the English throne and died in captivity in 1615. Her spirit is said to wander the Queen's house where she was held, her presence often accompanied by the scent of roses. But finally, we have the Eastern State Penitentiary, built on the Quaker-inspired belief in the redemptive power of solitude. It introduced a revolutionary approach to incarceration. The prison was designed to isolate inmates from each other. They would endure prolonged periods of solitary confinement. Both guards and prisoners were forbidden from speaking, and extreme measures were implemented to suppress any form of noise. It sounds like hell. The penitentiary's strict rules often gave way to brutal punishments, too. Inmates endured a range of torturous punishments, including ice-cold water baths in the middle of winter, a quote-unquote mad chair designed to cut off circulation to certain extremities, and a dreaded basement cell known as the Hole, where prisoners were subjected to complete and utter darkness. That, mixed with the lack of sound, yeah, that sounds, not good. With an absence of basic amenities in there as well. A number of people, including visitors and staff, have reported unsettling experiences within the building. Sightings of shadowy figures, the sounds of eerie wails, and even apparitions or faces manifesting on cell walls. So if you ever wanted a good reason to get into yoga, maybe this next story will convince you. In 2012, a South Korean man named Choi Gap-bok was being held in a police detention cell while under investigation for robbery. He'd spent a lot of time in custody over the years, and during that time, he'd kept up a serious yoga practice. His flexibility was just outstanding. On September 17th, 2012, he used that to his advantage. At the bottom of his cell door was a small slot used for passing food through. He covered himself in lotion, got down on the floor, and just worked his way through it. Head and arms first, then the rest of his body. The gap was extremely tight, as you can imagine, but he made it through. And before he started squeezing through the slot like a snake, he'd arranged his bedding to look like he was still asleep, which brought him some extra time. Somehow he managed to get out of the police station without being seen. He stayed on the run for 6 days, stealing food to survive. On September 22nd, police found him on a rooftop, hiding inside a cardboard box. He was taken back into custody. In 2017, 12 inmates, 12, managed to break out of a county jail in Alabama using peanut butter. There was an exit door inside the facility with a number on it. One of the inmates smeared some peanut butter over the number and then called a guard over to open the door. The guard was a new guy, still learning the layout, so with the number obscured, he thought he was opening a cell door. He was actually opening the exit, of course, and once that door was open, all 12 just booked it out. They grabbed the orange prison uniforms and blankets and used them to get over the razor wire fence outside. Most didn't get far. 11 of the 12 were back in custody within about 12 hours. The last guy, Brady Andrew Kilpatrick, made it further. He crossed into Florida before being caught a few days later. David Sweat and Richard Matt were both inmates at Clinton Correctional Facility in New York, and both had access to parts of the prison most inmates didn't, including the kitchen, which meant tools were around. At some point while walking the prison grounds, they noticed that a speed bump out in the field was actually covering a pipe big enough to crawl through. They spent months getting ready. Matt started a relationship with Joyce Mitchell, a tailor who worked inside the prison. He used that to convince her to smuggle in hacksaw blades hidden inside frozen hamburger meat. With those blades and whatever else they'd gathered, they cut through steel walls over a long stretch of time. Before they left, they stuffed dummies into their beds wearing prison sweatshirts to fool the guards during the nightly check. They also decided to troll the guards with a note reading, "Have a nice day." The plan was for Joyce Mitchell to be waiting outside with a car, but she never showed, so they had to go on their own. After several days on the run, law enforcement caught up with them. Matt was fired at and killed. Sweat was wounded and taken back into custody. Joyce Mitchell later admitted that she had feelings for both men and had a physical relationship with Matt. She pled guilty, got sentenced to up to 7 years, and was sent to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women. She's been denied parole twice. Finally, we have to discuss the most infamous prison escape in history. In June 1962, 3 men escaped from Alcatraz, a prison on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by freezing water, some of the strongest currents on the West Coast. Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin spent months getting ready. Using makeshift tools, they slowly widened the ventilation openings in their cells, a little at a time so that nobody would notice. To cover what they were doing, they made fake heads out of soap, toilet paper, and real hair, and left them in their beds, so during nighttime checks, it looked like they were still asleep. On the night they left, they climbed out through the openings, got to the roof, and made it down to the water. They had a raft and life vests made from raincoats they'd stitched together. After that, nobody really knows what happened to them. Guards found out the next morning. Search teams went out across the bay and up and down the coastline. They found pieces of the raft in the water. They never found the men, though. Most people assume that they didn't survive. I mean, the water's freezing cold, the currents are brutal, and the raft was pretty janky, but who knows, maybe they actually made it. To this day, the case has never officially been solved.